Welcome to another evening in the lives of the Vaishnavacharyas. My name is Chaturamadas. Nice to have you with us. Tonight we're going to talk about authors. It's an interesting thing being an author. Now, I myself have written a few paltry articles for the local newsletter here. When I was a traveling salesman, I wrote a couple of articles for the regional sales brochures that we had. I'm not a writer by any means, such as many of the senior devotees and well-spoken devotees in our society. Nagaraj Prabhu, Satyaraj Prabhu, both of whom are very good friends of mine. When I write, I'm basically just taking a very finite subject and writing a few paragraphs trying to express a point of view on that subject. And that's relatively easy. There's not a lot to it. But even in that effort, there's a constant re-evaluation, rewriting, adjusting the structure, replacing words that goes on. That's just for a simple little thing. The individuals we're going to speak about this evening are in a league far beyond anything of the nature I've just described. I'm going to speak tonight about Locan Das Thakura, Vrindavan Das Thakura, and Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. These three individuals are the prominent personalities that we know for producing and giving to us the wealth of Chaitanya literature with which we base our understanding of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu on. Each of the three of them had a particular part to play in the well-rounded picture we have of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Particularly in the case of Locan Das Thakura, I think there's a certain affinity for him because Locan Das Thakura was very, very much a favorite of Srila Prabhupada. Before we get into his life, though, I'd like to read a prayer that Locan Das Thakura opens his Chaitanya Mangala with in the invocation. Srila Locan Das Thakura writes as follows: My hope of hopes is to be near the lotus feet of Sri Narahari Thakur, to serve and worship him with my very life. The cherished desire of the fallen Locan Das is to be allowed by the grace of Narahari to sing the glories of Sri Gauranga. My Lord is Sri Narahari Thakur, and I am his servant. Bowing and praying before him, I beg him to allow me this service. This is my only aspiration. So if we examine this prayer, because of course the writings of the Vaishnavas are there for us to look at, to analyze and understand, we find four particular points present in this prayer that Locan starts off his work, the Chaitanya Mangala, with. The first thing we will find is a mood of aspiration. He's aspiring to develop and attain something. To aspire for something means that you have to think you don't have it, that you're lacking in that particular thing. Someone may aspire great wealth because they don't have wealth. They may aspire a college degree because they don't have that degree. They may aspire a beautiful spouse because they don't have that spouse. So Locan Das Thakura is aspiring for these things he speaks about here. This means he sees in himself that I don't have them. This is the first qualification for an author in Krishna consciousness, to feel themselves unqualified. The second thing that we see is that he seeks out service. He's actively seeking out that service. He wants to serve his guru. He wants to serve the devotees. He wants to be engaged by his guru in that service. So that desire to render service is what motivates and drives a Vaishnava in our development of Krishna consciousness. The third thing is he has determination. We can see in this prayer someone, as he says at the beginning, my hope of hopes. Okay, I don't have this ability, but I hope for that ability. This is something he's aspiring for. He's determined that he's going to get this. And how is he determined that he's going to get that? This is the fourth point of this prayer. By the desire for that service, by the manifestation of that determination coming from the grace of the Guru. This is what he speaks about. He talks about attaining the shelter at the lotus feet of Narahari, and that by the mercy of Lord Narahari, who he considers to be his Lord and himself to be the servant of, he therefore begs to be allowed this service. So this is a very wonderful mood for any Vaishnava, any devotee. You, me, those of you in the chat room, what to speak of Locan Das Thakura. He's actually setting the example for the rest of us. So this is a very nice mood, but particularly so if one is about to sit down and describe the eternal pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So very, very nice in this way. Now, Locan Das Thakura, his particular style of writing, his particular style of describing this, actually was aided by the fact that he was very well known for two things: his poetry and his musicianship. He was, as I mentioned, he was a songwriter. That meant he had to have some understanding of music and poetry at the same time. They both blend together. Well, of course, I don't know, some of the modern music, we may not find much poetic phrases in there. But, you know, traditionally in music there's a poetry in motion of sorts. So this is one of the reasons why I mentioned Srila Prabhupada, because Srila Prabhupada was a wonderful singer, and Prabhupada loved to perform bhajans. This is one of Srila Prabhupada's favorite things, and there's so many recorded bhajans of Srila Prabhupada. And he particularly was fond of the songs of Locan Das Thakura. He would sing these, because Locan Das Thakura's songs are all about Gauranga, Mahaprabhu, Nityananda, like that. So, in this way, he had that mood. Prabhupada appreciated that. Now, another thing about Locan Das Thakura's authoring the Chaitanya Mangala, it was unlike the other works of Gauranga Mahaprabhu. One of the things that it did very particularly that the other works, Chaitanya Bhagavat and Chaitanya Charitamrita, do not do, is there's a very detailed presentation of the conversation between Srimati Vishnupriya and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu the night before he took sannyas. You may remember that they had some conversation and then they took rest that night, and during the night he got up and left and took sannyas. So this Chaitanya Mangala gives a very detailed explanation of that conversation, presentation. And so in this way, it has certain things that it does that you don't find in the other books. Now the basis for Locan Das's writing was primarily a book called the Chaitanya Charita, which was written by Murari Gupta. Murari Gupta, you may remember, was more near to the age of Lord Chaitanya's father. Not exactly that old, but a bit older, and therefore had a bit of a parental mood towards Chaitanya. And he was also a physician, so he was always looking out for Chaitanya's health and well-being like that. There's many instances described in all the Chaitanya Leelas of when he would have some bodily airs or this or that or whatever. Murari Gupta would be there. So Murari Gupta was there for many of the, he was there for almost all of the Navadvip Leelas, and therefore a fair amount of the Puri Leelas. So in this way, we see that he took these writings and used them as his primary focus. The secondary source was, I'm crossing over here to, I was about to cross over to Vrindavan Das Thakura. Got sidetracked there. I'll go back to there in a minute. So, what was the need of another presentation, or this particular presentation of Chaitanya's pastimes? One particular point given is that Locan Das Thakura spoke in simple Bengali language, And because, of course, he was a musician by his nature, by his dharma, the verses lend themselves very easily to a flowing variety of musical styles, of musical ragas, of beautiful tunes and like that. The particular raga that he was well known for having composed most of his work in is called Panchali style. And so on the guidance, I should say, of his guru, Narahari Sakar, he, being a poet and musician, did not delve very deeply into the philosophical side, to the deep doctrines of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's life. He particularly wanted to impress upon the common people the magnanimous character and pastimes of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And in this way, it mentions that he was able to have that influence, So, very, very nice like that. We'll backtrack now that we've got a little background on him. We'll backtrack now and talk a little bit about his life. He was born into a Brahmin physician's family, if you will. They were Vaidya caste, physicians by trade, Brahmins by their training and their upbringing and all like that. And his father's name was Kamalakara, and his mother's name was Sadanandini. And they were unable to have any children except just Locan. So Locan was their pride and joy. They were so happy. He was the real focus of their life. And he was educated in his maternal father's village. And in that village, he started to get the association of Narahari Sakar. And he actually took initiation from Narahari Sakar. Now, at the time in which Locan Das Thakur lived, this would be the 1500s, early 1500s, 1520, 1523, like that. It was very common, Srila Prabhupada describes this, for marriage to take place at quite a young age. But the way it would work is the boy and girl would be suited up and they would be married sometimes even before their teens. But they didn't live together as husband and wife, of course. They were committed to each other so that as they reached their puberty, particularly so for the girl, she had her mind fixed, I already have this all arranged. So then once the boy and girl reached their puberty, then there would be a second marriage, like a full marriage, in which they would then join together as husband and wife once they were old enough for that. So in this way, Locan was married at a very young age, and he was kept with his parents, and his wife stayed with her parents. Even at this time, it mentions that Locan showed no interest towards family life, no interest towards developing social exchanges, and he was not even, he was actually quite renounced. He was very much absorbed in hearing about the Krishna Katha and the keeping the association of the devotees of Lord Gauranga. So this was his main focus. In due course of time, as I mentioned, it came to be the age at which he should now go to the village where his wife was. And so what happened was that he didn't really want to go. He just wasn't interested. So the mother and father were quite concerned. So they approached Narahari Sakar and said, please, we beg you. Our son is, properly married. He's a young boy. Please give him some encouragement. So Narahari Sakar said, all right, my dear Locan, you please go to the village and take your rightful duty with your wife. So now, keep in mind, as I mentioned, that this arrangement is made when they're very young. So Locan's only been to the village one time. So now he's older. He's gone to the village. And when he gets there, he doesn't exactly remember where his in-laws' house is. So he sees one girl on the street. And excuse me, he says, excuse me, Ma. This is Bengali for mother. Excuse me, mother. Can you please give me directions to such and such? And very chaste, she says, yes, it's she has her head down. It's this way, that way. So he goes there, and then he meets the mother and father-in-law. And then in the course of the exchange, he comes to find that the woman he has met on the street and addressed as his mother was actually his wife. So from that day forward, he looked upon his wife as a mother. And that just fueled his lack of interest in pursuing any type of family involvement and all like that, and increased his mood of renunciation and worship of Gauranga. So, in due course of time, Narahari Thakur gave initiation to Locan, and he left living at the village of his in-laws and went to stay with his guru in Srikunda. And he stayed there in Srikunda. And in that association of Narahari Thakur, he became very, very fixed in the process of devotional service, and was encouraged by Narahari Thakur to write the pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. As I mentioned, these were based primarily on the writings of Murari Gupta. He has one very nice prayer that he offers also in his Chaitanya Mangala. I attentively pay my obeisances to Vrindavan Das Thakur. His Bhagavat songs have enchanted the entire universe. So he was taking the shelter of Vrindavan Das Thakur as the personality who had written about the pastimes of the Lord before him. So Locan Das began to write these early pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu based on what he was told by his guru and based upon the writings of Murari Gupta. And he paid great attention to the early childhood pastimes. Now, there's an interesting thing that happens. The usual procedure would be to do an Adya, Madhya, and a Antya, a beginning, middle, and end pastimes. Locan Das Thakur adds, before the Adi, he adds a sutra, which is a collection of prayers and offerings to the different personalities involved in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, in the Chaitanya Leela, and leading up to Lord Chaitanya's appearance like that. There's altogether 24 chapters in his book, Chaitanya Mangala. Now, as I mentioned, there are some very interesting items that are mentioned in the Chaitanya Mangala that we don't find in the other Leelas. And one of them is one of my favorites. It mentions in the Kirtans of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu when he was in Navadvip. It mentions that when the Kirtans would really get going, it's described by Locan Das Thakur that there was much hiking up of the dhotis. So those of you that are big dancers in Kirtan, in the temple, or I don't know how you know, whatever, generally you pull the dhoti up a little bit to really dance good, So this is described, it says here the actual word, where is this here? 147, just a page ahead of myself. Hiking up his dhoti, Lord Gauranga roared like a lion and danced to the kirtan of his devotees. So very, very nice explanation like that. In that same chapter, this is chapter 3, the glories of Advaita Charya, there's a description given of the glories of Kali Yuga. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu describes that in Kali Yuga there is no benefit. The only good quality in Kali Yuga is bhakti. And that bhakti comes from the presence of the holy name. So there's a very nice description there. And then Lord Chaitanya gives a wonderful description of the... How does he say it? Let me just find the spot here so I can refer to it properly. The honey finger. Yes. He mentions, here are my 5 fingers. If I take one of these fingers and dip it into honey, then it becomes very sweet. But the other 4 fingers will be very distasteful. So he says this is the nature of a person who dips into the nectar of the holy name. How does he describe that? A liberated soul will accept the Lord, the honey-dipped finger, and leave everything else behind. So in this way he describes this wonderful mood of a liberated soul. So as I mentioned, in the Chaitanya Mangala, there are many wonderful descriptions like that. And this is one of the nice things, how there's a bit of a difference in the descriptions from the other books of the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya. So from there, we're going to move on to one of the other authors of the Vrindavan Leelas, and that is Vrindavan Das, of the Chaitanya Leelas, and that is Vrindavan Das Thakur.